Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me, as always, is our Vice President of Policy, Derek Cohen. Derek, session, what do we got, 19 days left, 18 days left?
But who's counting? Yeah, we're getting down to, single digits. Single digits soon enough.
Everybody's still looking good, feeling good, still feeling ready to go to the end of the session?
I don't know about that. I don't know if they were in the first place, though, either. So I think it'll be interesting.
We've got a absolutely packed show today. We'll get to it. First, I just want to get your thoughts on something that I read today. The Georgia Bulldogs football team, the national champions, have decided not to go to the White House. Why can't we have nice things? Everything's got to be political, right? Like they say that it's about COVID, but that seems like an odd thing these days for a reason not to go, or scheduling. Or no, I take it back. Previously people hadn't gone since LSU had gone, and the reason why is because of COVID. Now they're saying that it's scheduling. They said, okay, well, let's have another date, and they said, all of our dates aren't. And it just feels like everything's got to be politics now, and it can't. People can't just go and experience and have fun at the White House.
Well, what day are you free? Well, I can't. I'm washing my hair that day. Well, you didn't give me a day.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, you're exactly right. This is one of those things where back in our day, and I think we're both probably old enough that we can say that we had a day. Yeah. Back in our day, it was, even if you disagreed with the politics of the office holder, you would still do that because that is the highest executive office in the nation.
Right.
And, even if you don't like, President Trump, President Obama, whomever might be in that office, you would go because the invite in itself is the honor, not the individual bestowing the invitation on you.
I just worry that everything is becoming political now. But the real question is, the real reason I brought it up is, where should they go? If we can't go to the White House now and teams can't go and hold up their jersey and celebrate the fact that they won a great championship, where should teams go?
Well, the Super Bowl winner has Disney World on lockdown, right?
Okay,
so, we can't have that. So I'm thinking for winning the college football playoffs, maybe Universal Studios. You can do the Harry Potter thing.
All right.
Or maybe a local water park. We'll have Georgia Day at Schlitterbahn or something.
There we go. I like it. Let's promote Schlitterbahn as a way to go. Anyway,
if you enter the code Brian and Derek and the Schlitterbahn's landing page,
20% off if you're a national champion in something. All right. Well, let's get to the serious stuff. As always, I like a little shameless promotion at the very top of our show. We have a fantastic newsletter that goes out every Thursday. It's called The Post. You can find it at texaspolicy.com/The Post. And it's everything that we talk about during the week. It's everything that, all of our hot takes and bad jokes on things going on around Texas. And there's always something non-political at the end that's kind of fun that we like to hit. So we'd love you to sign up for that, texaspolicy.com/The Post. All right. Packed show today. What we're going to talk about, the border. We've got to talk about the border and everything that's going on there. Several cities, 3 cities, have declared an emergency already, even before Title 42 is no longer the law of the land. We've got Texas. We'll segue right into what the Texas legislature is doing on that. They passed, the House did, passed border security legislation yesterday. Republicans. There are some Republicans now that have gone outside of what you might think and want to do raise the age to buy rifles. That was a big story this week, so we'll chat about that. I know, being criminal justice being your background, you've got some hot thoughts on that.
The hottest.
Yeah, real sad story out of Texas. Unfortunately, a parent's worst nightmare that their first grader was subjected to sexual assault. But the really awful thing is that the schools made it worse. And so we don't necessarily need to talk about the gruesome details of that story. But there is legislation going through the Capitol right now, which would actually apply to that and hopefully have made that or prevent those situations from happening. We'll chat about that. And then we will end on some good news. A bill that passed this week in the House, it already passed in the Senate, and I think that means it's going to the governor's for the governor's signature, but it would give patients more information about what things cost, essentially give them an itemized receipt. We'll talk about that and why that's good for patients. But first, as always, we'll kick it off. Derek, give us your Lege-Land update. As I mentioned in my column this week, if you are not of the, if you don't like watching the sausage being made, this would be the week to avert your eyes.
Absolutely. And, we're recording this here on, right before afternoon on Thursday, which, for everyone who is, in this orbit is a special day for those who celebrate. Today is the day that all House bills must be read on second reading or they are functionally dead. And so we have we've talked about chubbing. We've talked about, how long the calendars get. Today we have a 20-page calendar. And so there's a lot of folks who have bills further on down the calendar. I put up a thing in our, in Teams, asking, weigh in where you think the calendar is going to end when the clock.
So you've got a poll about which page will end up on those 20 pages by the end of the day.
And my personal bet was 7. One of the more I would say probably, how do I want to classify Austin Prochko? More dour about the process. I said page 3.
As a relative newbie watching this process, they can move through some bills. I mean, there is kind of a rhythm to it once they get going. But if there's not a lot of a debate or a lot of discussion or a disagreement, I guess is what I'm looking for on some of these bills, they can really move through them.
Yeah. Yes and no, because if we look at just what we saw kick off really, I would say in earnest this week, but it had been happening, prior to, was the chubbing. And, there'd be an innocuous bill, and even on local and consent, there were chubbing bills on local and consent, which you got to be careful, because if you talk for more than 10 minutes, it automatically gets popped.
Yeah.
And so it was funny because they were doing that little song and dance on local and consent, and I was saying an enterprising representative should have gone up there and said, "Oh, you just talked for this bill for 8 minutes, but while you were doing that raised about 2 minutes worth of questions that I have." And then, it wouldn't extend the calendar all that much, and then that would be the analog of, what ends up in finding out. And so
there's some procedural retaliation that can happen for abusing or using, depending on your perspective, the rules to delay and
of course the House and the rules, specifically forbids like dilatory speeches and whatnot. But that being said, of course it happens anyway. And not only that, but one of the funnier, lighter items of the week, I should say, is one representative who popped a bill on a point of order, then the one whose bill got popped came back and popped the other ones on the exact same point of order, and that was, it was humorous, but they seemed in good spirits popping each other's bills, so it's an interesting sociological experiment to say the least.
And not to go on a big rant about this, but especially being, like I said, kind of a newbie to the whole process, on my third or fourth watching this, it just seems like they create a ton of pressure towards the end. A 20-page bill or 20-page calendar of bills, when at the beginning of the process, to say nothing of the 60-day waiting period at the very beginning of session, but even once we get past the 60-day period, or sorry, 60-day period, it just seems like there's stuff at the front end where there's just so much wasted time that I think for a casual observer of this process might get a little frustrated that they don't take it more seriously at the front end and try to move some of these bills, particularly the ones that don't have a lot of disagreement and controversy.
Well, absolutely. And then especially if you look at that first calendar that was set. Now, keep in mind, again, a lot of people pointed out to that first, I think it was 4 or 5 bill calendar, whatever the case might be. And it had some bill that was just, that really advanced the needs of the state by making sure that we appropriate label Texas honey, and that honey from Texas must be wholly derived from Texas apiaries.
I'm sure it's important.
Well, now that it's taken, the long national nightmare of mislabeled Texas honey is finally over. And it's one of those things where it's it's obviously an industry bill, so cottage industry in this case, but an industry bill. But yeah, it's those frustrations are not without merit, because we're sitting there having these protracted debates on things that even the left and the right can agree are important items of legislation. Meanwhile, we're making sure that we can open certain fireworks retailers on Diwali.
Yeah. So it can be frustrating, to see that we only have 90 days or so of time to pass this, and so you get to the very end like this, and it's like, well, why weren't we discussing these really important bills 6 weeks ago or whatever?
Well, let me just really quickly to say that there's. When you get that first calendar of bills that seem like nothing burgers, it's because the process to get those to that calendar committee and get that set to the calendar are largely it's largely completely unabated. Mm-hmm. Because again, who's going to do we have big mislabeled honey coming in, or big don't have fireworks on Diwali coming in to oppose these bills? No, and so that's usually tends to be why you see more of the innocuous bills getting towards the front, is because there's no headwind at all.
Now, over in the Senate, and you make this point all the time that they technically have deadlines, but they're sort of more like suggestions, and that's just sort of a product of the fact that Republicans have a supermajority over there, and of course you can always suspend the rules with a supermajority. I think it's interesting because there's certain, because the rules are suspended, because everyone knows that, and the rules are routinely suspended as a way to get things done. There's almost sort of an odd comfort in the certainty that bills aren't as dead in the Senate as they are, hard and fast as they are in the House. It's sort of an odd thing to depend on that certainty of suspending the rules, despite the fact that the rules are the rules.
Well, and then this is where folks who aren't getting their way in the Senate tend to point out, oh well, this is tyranny, and it's just an arbitrary rule, and it's like, you do realize the suspending of the rules is something that is basically kept in place to empower the minority. So it's one of those things where it's you need Democrat votes, or the process doesn't work, and then you're going to have to debate Senator Hall's blocker bill. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of the things that, again, if how they say little knowledge is dangerous. Well, this is the thing. It's like people that just have just tuned in this week, now have all these hot takes, and you're just like,
That probably describes most of my knowledge about the procedures and the rules and the way things work up to the legislature. So I guess I'm dangerous in that respect.
Very much so.
All right, well, let's get to the top topics of the day. We got a lot to cover because I want to hit it. But the first two, obviously, we have to talk about the border this week. We have to talk about what's going on down there. Kind of the jumping off point for this is that you've already got 3 cities, El Paso, Laredo, and Brownsville, whose mayors have already declared an emergency, and this was last week. I mean, this wasn't even this week. We have seen just the endless video of people streaming into this country unabated. Some disappearing forever, others giving themselves up and manipulating our asylum system. But we know that this is all being encouraged by the ending of Title 42, and for the political nerds that watch this program, you all know what that is. But this idea that it's all gonna explode sometime today or sometime over the next couple of weeks. We're talking about 10,000 or more a day coming in to this country, overwhelming our resources. And what can Texas do about it? Just from the 30,000 foot level, what do you see happening over the next month or so in terms of how Texas's response, or these border communities being overtaken by massive amounts of illegal immigrants?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, because you've seen the House's plan of attack on that, HB 20, go down on a point of order. And, it's one of the things where it's not that surprising, because some individuals in the legislature, specifically ones who fancy themselves more bomb throwers, basically don't have any solution themselves other than just doing nothing. And so rather than trying to put out an improved bill, they'll tear down the bills that exist. Now, for those who have not been watching, the actual HB 20, the meat and the potatoes of it, the border protection unit and some of the other things, were amended onto HB 7, and HB 7 did pass. And so that at least has a vehicle moving that can reasonably be said to be advancing. Now it's in the Senate, but reasonably have cleared the first major hurdle. That is necessary but not sufficient to answer the problem. Again, at the end of the day, the problem is we have such a porous border, and there's no other word to describe it. It is porous. That individuals can come across either at ports of entry or between ports of entry, and basically be given a court date sometime in the future, sometimes some electronic monitoring, and then just disappear into the interior of the country. Now, you and I have discussed this. I'm one who's generally pro-immigration and maybe even pro-expanded legal immigration, but we can't even have this discussion. We can't even have this discussion because there's absolutely no incentive to do the process correctly. And I'm not talking the citizenship problems. I'm just talking, getting a visa and coming in.
Right.
There's no reason to do that correctly when you can just literally walk across the border, and we're not enforcing through our business practices here in the state. We're not enforcing any sort of compliance with any of that either. And so, yeah, Title 42 was a useful thing in that regard when it was used, but at the end of the day, it forced the administration to do just a little bit of its job, and that's the problem. Is just how derelict that has been. How derelict the administration. And to be honest with you, this isn't just this administration. The Trump administration definitely had a more forward-facing closed border policy, but there were still things that it could have done. It could have, he ran on the wall, right? And there still were ways that could have gotten done both within partnership with the states and unilaterally at the federal level. Now, granted, he tried to move money around from DOD to accomplish all that. Probably wasn't the best way of doing it. But that being said, there were other options available. And obviously, going back, Obama and Bush prior to him, the numbers weren't necessarily as bad, but they were on that upward trajectory back at that point.
Right. You're making a good point. This is not a new policy. And you had the DHS secretary come out this week, Secretary Mayorkas, and say, look, this is a problem of both parties. This is a failure of multiple Congresses going back multiple decades. And he's not wrong. He's absolutely right. He's not wrong. But when you look at the numbers, it got exponentially worse under the Biden administration because almost from the very beginning, one of the first actions that he had within the first week were to reverse a lot of the Trump era things because he said he would do that during the campaign without actually evaluating that those were the things that were keeping that were at least keeping to some degree the immigration problem at bay. It was still a major crisis, but it didn't explode until after he did those. We've talked about multiple pieces that the Biden administration reversed that Trump had put into place, and Title 42, of course, was one of the things that he agreed to push back. One thing I do want to get into, which you talked about briefly, is the state response to this, and that there was a package, there still technically exists a package of border security bills that take various approaches to trying to secure the border or trying to more than anything provide more resources at the border, whether that's through the courts and trying to adjudicate some of these asylum cases. You've got more resources and more legal authority to go after the cartels or to go after those who would collude with the elitists who would collude with the cartels, the Mexican elites. We've talked about going after the assets that those folks would have in Texas to try and discourage their cooperation with the cartels. All of those are still out there. The main one, though, that got most of the attention that you mentioned was HB 20, and it was the creation of the Border Protection Unit. Right. And for whatever you think about the creation of that unit or how it was created, it did pass. It was eventually added to HB 7, and it did pass, which I think sends a very strong message. Even if it's some call it toothless, some just say it's weaker, but at any rate, it still reinforces the fact that Texas has the right to defend its own border. That if the federal government is not going to do something, that the people of Texas do not have to just sit there and take a punch in the face day after day after day. That we can in fact use our resources and use our own authority and our own sovereignty to go and try and create more resources at the border to protect our communities. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. The last word has not been said on this. I mean, obviously there are still Senate bills that have been passed that they can use to conference and try and figure out how to make these bills better. But I think just in general, I think the legislature did a good job of addressing the fact and reinforcing the fact that Texas can and has the rights to defend its own borders.
Yeah, and I think that we need innovation in this space, not necessarily because this is a problem that we're just this close to the solution from. We need innovation in this space because, again, we have a derelict administration and we have a derelict executive going back administrations who doesn't want to do the job of sealing the border. Now, of course, nothing's ever going to get done perfectly. You're going to have visa overstays. You're going to have all that litany of other things. But if we can't stop the most simple part of it, where it's individuals walking across the border between ports of entry, often very close to ports of entry, but between ports of entry, then why even bother with any of the other? Why not just go with fully open borders then? That's not me suggesting that as a policy proposal, but I'm just saying this performance art that we're engaging in is only slightly better than that.
Mm-hmm. And it's costing billions and billions of dollars, and we still have a crisis. And we've got. I
understand Chicago's almost at its breaking point.
Oh, right, yeah. With 8,000 illegal migrants that we've busted up there is gonna break the city of Chicago. The last thing I'll say on this is that we should give credit at least to the governor for Operation Lone Star. Certainly the collection of all the drugs that they've confiscated, the folks that they've apprehended. And despite all of that, we still have this major crisis. So I can only imagine, had we not gone through with that operation and not committed those hundreds of millions of dollars of resources, how much worse it would even be today. But still, it's a drop in the bucket, really, compared to what we're about to see.
But I would do it and point out that the floor debate was interesting, wherein certain members of the Democratic caucus, who obviously had issues with the Border Protection Unit segment of the bill, aired that by lavishing praise on DPS. Which again, somebody should have moved to have that reduced to writing and put in the Journal, where we actually had DPS praised as gold standard by liberal Democrats.
That would be very interesting and out of character for them. That just reminds me of the video. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw the video of DPS officers actually literally preventing people from coming up the embankments and illegally coming into this country. I mean, so it is happening there at the border. There is going to be at least someone there standing there preventing folks from coming in and really addressing all of that. Okay, so we could probably do more on the border. I mean, it really is going to be a problem. We'll probably have next week for sure, kind of the response and see what's happened here. But do you want to get to a few more issues? One of that was particularly interesting. Obviously, there's been a lot of push for from the left for gun restrictions this session. They're with the tragedies that have happened in Texas and multiple areas, but of course the major one being Uvalde. Right. We've had the grieving parents that have come up and really made the case for more gun restrictions. The one in particular that they seem to be all rallying around is the raise the age. So raising the age from 18 to 21 for someone to be able to buy a rifle, or maybe a specific kind of rifle. You can tell us a little bit more about that. But what are your thoughts on this? I mean, raise the age is not something that's new. It's been around for a long time. In fact, it's been tested. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's actually been struck down by the courts already, and of all places, the most liberal circuit court in America out on the West Coast. But just in general, your thoughts on raise the age and whether or not that's a good piece of policy.
Well, I think you need to take a look at it it doesn't occur in a vacuum. Obviously, the Uvalde incident was perpetrated with such weapons by an individual who was 18 years of age. And so you go, oh, okay, well, let's ban that. Because then, if we ban it from those age, allow me to give the best argument the opposition would say, or I guess the supporters of that particular bill would say, is that, look, your brain's not fully cooked when you're 18 years old. I can't speak for you, Brian, but I know that when I was 18 years old, I was not, probably not the most calculated individual making the best use of my executive function, like literally other 18-year-old guy out there. And they said, well, if you have these weapons that could be so dangerous, then why are we allowing 18-year-olds to access this? And it has this curb appeal. It makes sense. And again, we'll get into the legal
and to be
argument.
fair, there's polling on this. It says the majority of Texans would agree with that position.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Here's the reality in which this occurred in the Texas legislature. So before, obviously there was a whole bunch of activism in this. There were a bunch of individuals who allowed themselves to be made props of certain interested parties, and they flooded the Capitol. Yelled, hoot and hollered, created a scene, and none of the bills moved out of the community safety committee, and so we get to the deadline on Tuesday, I believe it was, where all bills need to have been reported favorably from committee in order to even, by their own estimation, have that. And at this point, no bill had been voted out, and so obviously under intense pressure, Chairman Guillen had agreed to set 2744, which is the one you're referring to, for a hearing. They voted that out, I believe it was 8-5, and a lot of people are, quick to blame the two Republicans who went with the vote, who voted aye, and that was Justin Holland and Sam Harless. And the thing is, people that, on both sides really, that are looking at this, they feel the fix is in against me, and so that's what they project onto this. I would wager money that those individuals who voted the way they did were encouraged to do so by certain people, were encouraged to do so knowing full well that bill, when it was voted out, was already dead. Not already dead in the Senate, not, I don't know if it'll make it to the House floor. It was procedurally dead before it even came up for a vote. It would have needed to have been voted out of that committee, especially something that contentious, weeks prior. Not a day prior, not a week prior, but weeks prior. And so it gets voted out. The report doesn't even get into calendars. I'll have to check on TLO, but not even in time before the calendar meeting to set the calendars for the rest, or until the House bills are expired, which we're at today. And so they weren't even to a place where they could set that. And nowhere if that goes to calendars, the chairman of calendars voted no on it. It goes to calendars. Obviously, some of the members of calendars are going to tag it because it's a bad bill, to be honest with you. And there was just no ability for that to get to the floor. But if you look at the national discussion on this, hooting and hollering on the Democrat side saying, oh, this can happen even in Texas. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go off here. I'm a little bit disgusted. Mostly because the people that found this vote politically convenient for them preyed on grieving families. They put it out there that this was going to happen. Now, again, policy-wise, I have misgivings with the bill. I do not begrudge anyone who lost a child in a tragedy for not reading the fine print or the bill analysis or the fiscal note or any of that stuff.
Of course.
I obviously have no problem with that. And to be honest with you, I think that victims, well, I'll be the first from the criminal justice standpoint to say victims are not monolithic. They don't all want the same thing. Some victims want, have a very Christian perspective on someone who did them wrong and wish to forgive. There's others who want to see that people hung up by their toes. We can't paint it as a broad picture. Be that as it may, the people that found this politically convenient were pushing this particular bill and the vote on it as, look, this is we're having effect. Now I saw an email blast. We're doing this. It's actually happening. Donate to Moms Demand Action. And all that stuff. And it's so disgusting because, again, knowing that when it was voted out, it was procedurally dead by the House's own rules. Yet here we are trying to, I said we, not us, but like other groups were fundraising off of it, saying, oh, the dam's breaking in Texas. And it's not even on a bill, again, constitutionality aside, it's not even on a bill that would have guaranteed that folks would have been alive. It may have delayed the eventual event in Uvalde. It may have delayed.
And I have the same concerns, but just more from the policy side or the legal side of it, is that this is giving those families false hope that Texas is going to be quote unquote doing something that would have prevented that tragedy from happening, and giving them false hope on the one sense procedurally, because the bill is obviously not going anywhere. But even if it did, even if somehow some magic wand allowed this bill to get to the governor's desk and he was willing to sign it, bills like this have already been deemed unconstitutional. I mean, there is no way.
Well, from those radical right-wing ideologues in the Ninth Circuit.
And the Ninth Circuit, which is the most liberal circuit, because it's very clear that the way the bill is written, or that the way that the policy works is that you are denying a young adult. Like, again, to your point, if we want to have a discussion about who is an adult and who is not an adult, that's a much different discussion that has much larger implications for all kinds of things, not to mention our military. And
we can raise the age to vote. I mean,
or voting and all kinds of things. But we have decided that the age of adulthood is 18, and you can't deny someone, if they're an adult, their constitutional rights simply by being 19 versus being 25 or 26 years old. Right. And that's very clear. It's what the Ninth Circuit said, that there are reasons you can deny someone their constitutional right to bear arms. I mean, if they're a felon, and there's all kinds of reasons there. But being 19 years old or being 20 years old is simply not one of them. It is patently unconstitutional. So to your point about the procedural stuff, I mean, that is horrendous for them to use these families as props in that way.
And I agree with you on your analysis as well. It's just that one was the closest weapon to hand given the argument.
Yeah, absolutely. But even if they could get it through, even if they had started at the very beginning of this, there's no way that this bill ever, I mean, even if it becomes law, there's no way that it ever stays law. It would be challenged immediately, and it would be struck down because it is clearly unconstitutional. So to me, that was really the offensive thing about this, is that policymakers should know this. Policymakers do know this, but they're pushing it for other reasons, which are most likely political in nature, and that's pretty sickening.
Yeah, and I mean, it's if there was a good faith motivation on behalf of those who want to enact gun control to get this done, they would have had other things in that realm that would have been like intermediate steps that they could have. But everything is anti-second, and everything's anti-Second Amendment maximalism all the time, right? And I think that on the right, and I'll be the first to admit, as the guy who handles our gun work here, I think we default to opposition on the right before we even have the conversation, and that does us a disservice because we can't get the correct information out there on why we're at where we're at. But that being said, there was no intermediate steps being proposed. For example, if you wanted to get rid of that weapons ownership from 18 to 20 year olds, why would you not entertain, say, a waiting period for that particular age bracket, right? And so nobody was doing that. It's all close the gun show loophole, ban these weapons, do this, make private transfers have to go through NICS, all that stuff. Is all that there's no like intermediate step, like maybe even a Texas background.
And things that would pass constitutional muster, things that are already become law, things that would have bipartisan support, none of that. It just goes right to the most extreme.
Yeah, and it's always restrictions or restricting a class of otherwise law-abiding people. It's the same thing we talk about with the pistol brace, right? It's overnight, because they don't turn around these tax stamps like in in weeks. Overnight, we just created a class of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of felons, of folks who have that on rifles that have barrels that are below 16 inches. And again, these are the arbitrary lengths that we exist in under our regulatory structure on firearms. And everyone says, oh, well, it's the NRA. It's the NRA. I have to say again, it's not the NRA. The NRA the NRA does not vote. But who does vote? The millions of members of the NRA. And if they're joining an organization like the NRA, they probably have amongst their animating issues guns. And so I think
I will give credit to, there was a Dallas Morning News story actually about that, and of course the headline was, the real reason why Texas gun laws, why we can't pass any new Texas or new gun laws in Texas. And of course I was expecting to open it up and it would say the NRA, but it actually said, look, it's the people who vote. Mm-hmm. It's the people, particularly it kind of pushed it, this was Republican primary voters or the people who are running the Republican Party, all those things aside, but at least it said it's the voters. It's the fact that there is popular support or popular opposition against these laws, and that's why the members don't pass them.
And let me just really quickly and that, because I remember taking a look at this. I believe it might have been when Trump was elected, and it might have been 18. I can't remember which year it was. But if you look at like the endorsements by, say, the activist Bloomberg groups and that whole constellation about who got money, who was endorsed, is that they actually took a hit. Those districts, this was before redistricting, that those members took a hit. The incumbents got elected with a lower margin than they had the cycle prior, and those who were endorsed won by a lower margin than the person who was in that seat before. Now that the latter is a little explainable with name ID and stuff like that, but the point being is my mental model of what the left's gun voter looks like is that it is not a. I guarantee there are people that come to their political preferences solely on the basis of firearm policy. But it is so infinitely small that what most of these people are, and just having been in hearings with these folks, I can say is, no, these are progressives, these are liberals who also share that particular prior on the issue of firearms. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of researchers out there who are definitely, they're academics, so obviously they're liberal, but there are a couple of researchers out there who, like I'm thinking of Gary Kleck specifically, who has put out a lot of good work on specifically defensive gun use and things like that. So that's the apostasy, right? And here it's just, they're left wing, and they also have a non-heterodox view in that particular world of firearms. So in other words, there's very little that animates them on that issue specifically, but it's part of the portfolio of issues that essentially just makes up the left side of our political spectrum.
All right, so we got a couple things that we want to get to, and then I know we're kind of running out of time, but I do want to get to them. One is just, and we haven't spent a whole lot of time on the story, but it is kind of a horrendous story out of Texas, of all places, in Plainsview ISD, where a first grader essentially was, and won't go into the graphic details, but was sexually assaulted. The issue here,
and recorded on an iPad.
That's why apparently the FBI is involved, and I won't get into the awful details of the story. That all is being, of course, is all coming out, all those details. What is awful here is that the parents weren't notified immediately of what had happened. There was CPS that was notified. There was obviously, other school officials that were notified. The parents were not notified. And even after this incident had taken place, that poor first grade girl had to sit there next to her abuser for at least a week and a half, 10 days or so before the parents ever found out about this. And the parents only found out because the daughter started acting different, and they were trying to ask her, what's going on, sleeping issues, those kinds of things. And they finally got it out of her. And once she told them, of course, they went to the school, and then the whole story broke. I bring that up to say this is one of the reasons why we are so adamant about parental empowerment, about parental rights, and this piece of legislation, SB 8, which is supposedly so controversial because of the school choice issues. 2/3 of this bill is about parental rights. One of the provisions in SB 8 would have prevented this because it requires that if a child is in a situation like this, that the parents be notified within 24 hours of something like this happening. And this is one of the reasons, it's unconscionable to think that the parents weren't notified immediately. I'm not sure what the cover-up was about or what they were thinking, in their investigation or whatnot, but that would be the first thing, is to let the parents know about what happened. But that's apparently not the law in Texas right now, and SB 8 has a provision that would change that.
So this is, and I can't disagree with anything you said, but one thing I will point out is that we hear time and time again in this particular space, school choice will destroy the rural. School choice will destroy the rurals. And obviously it's nonsense. But take this example. Plainsview ISD, viewing the plains. It's not suburban Houston, right? Mm-hmm. It's not in Round Rock. That is a rural school district. Now, this child while maybe the assailant, and I'm referring to other children as it's
still another first grader.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough, but that child is now stuck in that school. There is no ability outside of, if there's some private school up in that area that the parent will have to pay full freight on. There is no ability to extract that child despite what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And
without making tremendous sacrifices, as you say, either financial to go to a private school or to take them in and homeschool them.
Yeah.
Without making tremendous sacacrifices, they're stuck in that school.
Absolutely. And that is the problem with this rural fallacy, and the fact that, again, if the local school district is doing great, and I know that it's a bit of a political deflection, but all the reps say, and my school district is, most of them probably are. But what are we doing for this girl? Mm-hmm. What are we doing for this girl other than perpetuating a system that she is not allowed to escape from, absent tremendous sacrifice on behalf of her parents? And this is just, it lays bare the absolute hypocrisy that we're dealing with in the school choice debate.
And I agree. I think at the end of the day, it always comes down to choice, because without choice, none of these parental rights even really matter if the schools can tell us to pounce in. But I think, but I don't want to short shrift this bill, and what the importance of it is that it does give parents these rights, and it treats parents, it shifts the balance so that parents are being served, and the school districts aren't just simply willy-nilly doing whatever they want, irrespective of what the parents want, and that it actually does shift. I don't want to say the balance of power necessarily, but at the very least, it allows parents to have more information about everything that's going on in schools, the least of which should be when your child is attacked. All right, so
no, I was just going to add, and hopefully the legislators that are standing in the way of this, think about this when they, but we've seen the mental gymnastics they've already taken to justify some of this, so it's not really that surprising.
All right, so I want to definitely end on some good news, but I did want to highlight that because I think it's really important that this legislation, it's not just the horrific act, but that there are reforms that could prevent this kind of thing from happening. So definitely worth talking about. But I want to end up on some good news. A bill passes in the Senate and in the House to give patients more information about what things cost. And in this case, like our, excuse me, our, what I think most of us would prefer is that when you go to the doctor, that it works just like anywhere else. Anywhere else where you would spend some money, at the mechanic or at the grocery store or wherever, where you know what the prices are before you decide to get the service or the product, right? Like that's what everybody would expect. Outside of emergency services, I think you should be able to go into a place and know exactly what it's going to cost you to have some procedure done or to have some kind of test done. That's unfortunately not what this legislation does, but it does give you an itemized list of what you spent your money on, or what the insurance, what your insurance paid for. That way you know what things actually cost. So this isn't, we're not getting the touchdown, we're not spiking the ball here, but I think this is a good bill that actually gets us down the field.
Yeah, so they did put an amendment on in the House, so it does need at least a concurrence vote in the Senate. But given
Thank
what
you for that procedural stuff that I don't follow.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm here, not just for the good looks, obviously, but the nerd stuff too, right? But that bill, the amendment they put on it, and this is not to equivocate. It made because sometimes I go, oh, there's a perfecting amendment, which is usually code for, I don't like something about this bill, so I'm going to change it so I at least get something out of it.
Yeah.
But no, this was actually a really good perfecting amendment. It exempted federally qualified care centers who basically are not billing people anyway, and they're federally, so our ability to regulate such is is a little questionable outside of the licensing part. But it also exempts physicians as well, so anybody that has that particular practice. And so this bill, and I believe David did a layout with the author, with Caroline Harris. This bill,
our expert Dave Ballot, our healthcare expert.
Absolutely, yeah. I should have mentioned that. This bill is fantastic, and again, it's not because it also prohibits collection on places that did not provide this service. And of course, obviously the hospital screamed bloody murder about it, and it's like, what in what other realm of society do I go to purchase something You go to Academy Sports, you get yourself a fishing shirt and maybe a box of ammo or something, and there you go. Oh yeah, well the fishing shirt was only $16. I got the Magellan, it's like the
nice shirt.
Yeah, the Columbia PFG knockoff, but still a really good product. But then they're like, oh yeah, the ammo is like $9,000, and it's not in the caliber you needed, and it's like.
Oh, we also charged your credit card already.
Yeah, it's already gone through. Oh, and by the way, pay up now or you're going to collections.
Yeah.
And so that in and of itself is, I mean, again, it seems like an absurd metaphor, but that is exactly one for one how this works.
Yeah.
And so I have to say that, again, this is a freshman carrying this bill. Now, granted, Representative Harris worked for Senator Hughes, who's obviously a very well-established, successful senator, and actually
who carried the Senate bill.
Absolutely. And so it's not like the whole process is learned anew here. But the fact that you have a freshman was able to carry a bill of this importance, a bill of this magnitude. I believe the House bill was 1973, if I recall off the top of my head, and 490, I believe, was the Senate bill.
The Senate bill, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually was worried because it was one of the ones I was watching. I saw 1973 get delayed. Representative Harris made the motion to delay her own bill, but it was so that 490 could catch up.
Yeah.
And so they laid out 490 instead, which is great because that takes away, the process of 1973 having to go through the Senate,
right,
because 490 already had. And so it's one of those bills that, again, we say, oh, it's just common sense legislation. I don't think it gets any more common sense than this. And the fact that this is really a blow for patients' rights is just, part of the animating principle I think that our legislature has taken up, and we've applauded before, basically saying that, look, they're at a point where, again, the debate that's, yay Obamacare, boo Obamacare,
We're way past that.
Yeah, they're way past that. Now they're saying, what do we do to ensure that not only is there care for people to receive, but that those people get care as affordably and fairly as possible. And this is one bill that speaks to that.
And I just want to reiterate that we have Senator Hughes in the Senate, who is one of the real true workhorses in the Senate, and
as the kids say, one of the real ones.
Yeah, one of the real ones over in the Senate. And of course, but then you have that contrasted with the freshman Representative Caroline Harris, who is this is a really substantive bill that was somewhat controversial, as you said. I mean, there was a opposition by an organization like the hospitals. That's not cheap organization or cheap opposition. And so she really worked really hard. So I just think it's a really cool thing to highlight that we had this dynamic both between the Senate and the House.
And to be honest with you, with I've asked several members in various situations, I've pointed out that freshmen this year are carrying some big bills. Whether you're talking about this one, Representative Troxclair's, everyone calls them anti-Austin bills. Well, if Austin would stop messing up so much. But like even the one about the bond debt, these are big consequential bills that they are working. And these
Representative Kerry Isaac had a big win this year.
The DEI rider on arguably it's a but a line in the 1,000 page budget. That might be the most consequential. It's just really amazing to see, because freshmen for so long have been told to, sit down, shut up, be seen and not heard. And if you're not seen, fine. But now part of their integration into this body has been actually getting good stuff across the finish line. I think that speaks to what things should be run in the future.
Well, I hope everybody has the feels now, and everybody is is feeling more positive.
Good palate cleanser.
Yeah, right. For those last 2 or 3 stories that we wanted to chat about. So anyway, we've gone way over time, but I thought that was a really good discussion, and there was a lot going on this week, and we'll probably have to do it again next week because we'll have you called today the House Dio de los Muertos. So we'll have that day in the Senate next week, and so there'll be a lot of pressure.
Yeah, like I said, I think you should just let's see if last night's any indication. Maybe put casino gaming on the ofrenda.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll keep an eye on all of that and talk about it again next week. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. If you have any feedback for us, you can definitely check us out on social media. Derek and I both have fairly active Twitter profiles and accounts, and so you can get us there if you have any feedback or constructive criticism. We love to hear you, or even the haters. We love to hear from you guys as well. All right, so we'll see you next time. As always, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next week.